this video I would like to explain a little bit about my philosophy concerning jazz guitar improvisation or jazz improvisation in general. I tend to distinguish four major areas that you have to develop to learn to improvise. And those four areas are knowledge, technique, creativity and hearing. Now, knowledge and technique I think are pretty much obvious. You have to have some knowledge, and especially for jazz improvisation, you have to have a decent knowledge of scales and chords. So, you need to know, for instance, that a C major 7th chord is built out of a C triad, C, E, G, and a major 7th, which would be the 7th note, which is a B. So a C major 7th chord could be this, or could be this, or could be this. So knowledge of building chords is something that you need, and I think that's not really that difficult because you can look it up, and the system is not that difficult. So if you understand the system, you can pretty much derive any kind of chord, which doesn't mean that you know how to use it, but let's get to that later. So you need knowledge, first of all. You also need to know the scales, the basic scales. So let's say, first of all, the major scale. So you have to know, for instance, that an E flat major scale contains these notes: E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. Actually, it's not critical that you know all the note names, but you have to know that these are the intervals. That's the least that you have to know. And of course, that brings me to the second point of technique. You have to be able to play it. That's obvious. If you know this is the scale, you also have to be able to play it fluently. And by fluently, I mean with a clear articulation, with a clear tone, and without hesitation. So that very basic skill of playing scales is something that is really essential as a core skill for improvisation. We'll get to ways to practice that later. So knowing those scales and being able to play them fluently is just a very basic skill that you will need. Now I think knowledge and technique are pretty much obvious points. What is more difficult to explain are the areas of creativity and hearing, and they're also quite connected. So creativity means that if you have the knowledge and if you have the technique, so if you can play the scales and you can play the chords, you need to develop the skill to use them in a creative way. Basically meaning that you can build your own phrases, that you can make up phrases, that you can invent phrases on the spot. So if you see, or rather if you hear a chord progression, that you can get ideas in your head and convert them to notes. Now this creative part is also something that you can definitely learn, and there are ways to practice that. And hearing is very closely related to that, because if you cannot hear internally in your head what you're playing, it's very difficult to play something with a musical intention. If you want to play something in a musical way, you have to know what you're playing. You basically have to hear it in your head. If you play something purely on knowledge, purely because you know that you should be playing certain notes or you can play certain notes, but if you cannot hear them internally, then it's a bit like pronouncing a sentence in a foreign language that you don't understand. If you pronounce a sentence in a foreign language and you don't know what you're saying or what it means really, you might be able to make the right sounds, but you cannot give it the right intonation and the right feeling. In order to do that, you have to understand what you're saying. So musically it's the same way. If you're playing notes, scales, if you don't really know what you're saying musically, you cannot put the right musical feeling into it. And understanding these notes and hearing those notes is something that you also can practice by, For instance, practicing to recognize intervals, to recognize certain chord types like major and minor and dominant chords and different kinds of chords. Recognize them by hearing. And you can practice hearing intervals. And there are all kinds of ways to practice that. Now let's talk a little bit about this creative part. So suppose you want to build phrases, or you want to play phrases, you want to improvise phrases in a single key, in a single scale, just to keep it simple. Let's take the key of, let's take B flat. This is a B flat major 7th. And I'm going to alternate with an F, an F7, sus4. So suppose I play a simple rhythm with these two chords. Now you noticed I used different shapes. So this is a B flat major 7th, F suspended. This is also a B flat major 7th, and this is also an F suspended chord. So you want to play phrases in the key of B flat. So first, be sure that you know where the notes are. So let's say we play them in this position. B flat scale. Now the first thing I want to do, first I want to demonstrate that you can play an interesting solo with just the scale notes. You don't need to play all kinds of exotic scales or exotic notes. Just the scale notes will do fine to begin with. So just as a demonstration, let's say we use just the scale notes. So I'm just using the B flat major scale and nothing else. Now how do you get to that point? You can practice that, and actually that's an exercise in my product called the Jazz Exercises. One of the first exercises is to basically explore the scale, which you can do by just playing the scale. And then you can play it in intervals like this. And you can then start to play different intervals, like for instance. Now you can play around with that for some time until you are very comfortable finding the notes and going from one note in the B flat major scale to another note in the B flat major scale. Then there are exercises in the Jazz Exercises package that are based on the concept of building phrases from very few notes and then building them up to more notes. A very useful concept is to practice building phrases from very simple basic phrases that consist of only one of three notes. So let's say I start with these three notes: B flat, C, D. Almost trivial, but it's enough to start. So I'm going to try to build phrases, to make phrases with 3 notes. And so I only have these 3 notes, so the only thing I can do is change the order of the notes and and play them in different rhythms, and maybe with the different emphasis, and see what I can do with these 3 notes. Or I can try to use even more interesting rhythms. You can use some embellishments like the sliding. So you see, these phrases are extremely basic, but still it's a start. And hopefully they do sound like music. So start with 3 notes, then go to 4 notes. Now this note, which is E flat, it fits nicely on the F suspended chord. So I'll mainly use it there. So let's try something with 4 notes. Now when I'm playing this, I really want to add this note, F, so the 5th note. So now I have 5 notes out of the scale. So now I'm going to try something with 5 notes. So I hope you get the idea. This is a way of practicing where you just add 1 note at a time and then explore what you can do with the notes that you have, like 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, and just keep expanding. And so in that way you learn the positions of the notes, but you also start to find out for yourself how you can use these notes, what you can do with those notes. And that's actually an essential part of developing this creative process of building phrases, of making up melodies on the spot. And even with a single scale and a single chord, this is a very important and basic skill to develop. So in fact, the first part of the jazz exercises are about that kind of skill. Knowing the scales, being able to play the scale, and also being able to exploit the notes in the scale to build phrases.